Hey guys, it's Kelly here again and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about books, and I know that's controversial. I have never spoken about books before here on this channel. This is a completely different channel that has been totally active in the last 6 months. Okay, so I don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what I'm talking about, so let's just talk about books. I have not made a proper wrap-up since June last year, and that is mostly because I stopped reading in June last year, or was it July? I don't know. I stopped reading and I went through some personal stuff in my life, also my work, and I don't know, I wasn't in the mood to read. But in December, I started picking up books again, and I guess I just broke that reading slump, and I read a few books that I would like to share with you guys. Some of them I read a really long time ago, so I'm not going to be able to remember everything of my incoherent thoughts while reading them and after finishing them. But a big chunk of them I actually do remember, and I wanted to talk to you about them either way. So if I'm not mistaken, the last video where I talked about a book that I talked about The Bone Witch, and after that, or like at the same time, I also finished The Humans by Matt Haig, and I think I never spoke about it on this channel, or maybe I mentioned it briefly, I'm not sure, but that's the first one that I'm going to choose to talk about today. So The Humans by Matt Haig is a sci-fi humorous book. It is about an alien that comes to Earth in disguise, and he takes over a human's life, and he has a mission to infiltrate the human society and figure out some stuff that his human counterpart did, and try to erase them from our history because they will help us advance our technology way too much. And the alien race, I am sorry about my phone going off. Let me just silence that. So the alien race doesn't think that humanity is ready for that scientific jump. So it's one of the best books that I've read in a long while. I think that's kind of what got me out of my reading slump for the most part, because it was just so funny, and it's weird because it's British and I don't typically enjoy British humor. I'm very particular with my British humor. I do, however, enjoy Terry Pratchett, so I don't know, maybe that's not the greatest thing to say. I guess I do enjoy British humor. But anyway, I really enjoyed it. It was really funny. It had some very sincere and nice messages about humanity, especially at the end when everything just kind of went down. The alien kind of lists a few things that make us human, or that are important to humans, and I think there were like 30 points or something, or 50. It was just so sweet and heart-wrenching at the same time, and I think that people should really read this book. It started off very funny and kind of ridiculous in the beginning. I think I was actually laughing out loud while I was reading maybe the first 40-50 pages, because I was just not expecting to enjoy it that much. But as I read through, it got more serious and dived into some more serious topics, which I also appreciated. Still kept its quirky charm and its humor, but it definitely made it more meaningful and not just ridiculous like the beginning of the book. I don't remember the rating that I gave it, but I'm pretty sure it was 5 stars. I'm going to put ratings on the screen for each book depending on my Goodreads, but I really enjoyed it and I definitely recommend this book. After that, I actually picked up a few other books by him, one of which was what was its name? It was like a self-help book about depression. I don't remember its name. I'm going to put it on the screen. I read through half of it, and honestly, it's a very personal read, and unless you're in the right state of mind to read it, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're feeling a bit anxious, well, I don't know how to recommend this book. I did like it, but I felt like it made me anxious more than I already was. So perhaps because he was talking about suicide and anxiety and how he felt, and you really feel the way that he felt while reading this book. So I guess you need to be, more stable while reading this, because you might be triggered by some stuff, you might feel a bit heavy. So if you want to read it, make sure that you feel right starting it. Otherwise, you have a panic attack on the bus and start crying for no reason. And I'm not saying that happened to me, but it kind of happened to me. The next book that I finished was around December, and it was The Poppy War. And I think this is like a high fantasy. I'm not sure it was young adult. I'm pretty sure it's just high fantasy, and I'm pretty sure it's an adult fantasy. So The Poppy War was recommended by a couple of booktubers here on BookTube, and I wanted to read it a lot because I heard really great things about it, and I did enjoy it. I think I gave it like 4 stars. The only thing is, even though I read it a few months ago, I don't really remember much of it, which is, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe not a great thing. And I did listen to it as an audiobook, which is even worse because I tend to remember the audiobooks better. The audiobook in itself was really great. I remember that I loved the narration. I loved the way that the narrator was portraying different characters. But okay, so I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Maybe if I start trying to describe the book to you, maybe some things will jar my memory and I'll remember more. So it is a fantasy, and we have our main character, Rin? Was that her name? I don't even remember the main character's name. Damn, that's not good. Anyway, we have our main character. She has a not so great family situation going on, and her parents basically want to sell her to an old merchant so they can get some cash out of her, and she doesn't want that. She's pretty badass. She wants to go to a military academy and become a general or a commander, and she's actually really good at her studies. She's not very poised and elegant, so she's not very ladylike. She is instead very, like I said, badass, and so she wants to be a military general. She goes to that academy, and she's kind of like the underdog. People are treating her badly, so she has to constantly prove herself. She's very determined to be where she is, and she thinks that she is destined for something great. While she's at the academy, some things start to be discovered. For instance, the magic system. So the magic system is a bit like god-based. There are a bunch of gods, and each student or each soldier can pray to a certain god and receive gifts in terms of magic. It's a bit complex, and you don't get into it for a very huge part of the book. So I think that's why my mind is kind of suffering and kind of straining itself to remember exactly what the magic system was. But our main character, at first she doesn't really believe in that sort of stuff. She's an atheist. She doesn't believe in gods. She doesn't think that the pantheon with all of the gods and the entities is real, but she slowly starts realizing that it actually is. While she's at the academy and while she's learning to channel her abilities and become a better fighter, war breaks out, and the characters are faced with, well, growing up faster than they expected. So everyone is supposed to protect the academy, protect their schoolmates, their friends. Everyone is put into different squadrons, and well, basically it's just war. So there are some gruesome things, some not so happy-go-lucky descriptions. Of course, like I said, it's war. There's trigger warnings for basically everything, but I think that right around when war broke loose, I kind of lost a bit of interest in the book, which is a shame. I realized reading this that I don't like reading about military stuff, which I didn't know about myself, but apparently I don't. So military action and fights were not, I mean, it's something for movies, I guess. I can visualize it, but I think it's more impactful when I see it on the big screen. So personally for me, I guess the book wasn't as memorable just because of that. I don't remember the ending, pretty sure it was a cliffhanger. I have absolutely no memory of it, but we'll definitely continue on with the series, and hopefully I start remembering some stuff, because I am very disappointed in myself that I didn't. And I gave it a pretty high rating. I think I gave it like 4 stars, so I'm shocked that I remember so little about it. Either way, it was interesting. I would recommend it if you like fantasy, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people would enjoy this book. Had a lot of trouble with the pacing. It was a bit slow in the beginning, and then fast and then slow again, so keep that in mind. It's a pretty long book too. Next up, I read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F, and I'm going to have to blur that one out, but I absolutely love this book. I don't read self-help books, and this is not your typical self-help book. It is actually incredibly funny, and it's very insightful. It doesn't necessarily tell you new information that most adults with a developed consciousness already know everything that's in the book, but it does a really good job at structuring certain aspects of your life and your thought process, and it gives you very good examples, and it gives you life events, things that actually happen in the world, and kind of makes a life lesson out of them. And I thought it was very insightful and very intriguing, very interesting to read, and it was just very light, and I would recommend it to absolutely anyone. There's things about music because the author wanted to be a musician, so there are some references towards music and bands, for instance Metallica. There are some things concerning the World War II, I believe. There are very interesting details and facts woven into it, and I would definitely recommend to anyone who wants to try it. Next up, I read Batman White Knight, which is a comic book or a graphic novel. I'm not sure. A friend of mine lent it to me, and I really wanted to read it because the art style was really interesting and different than the other Batman comics that I've read so far, and I really enjoyed it. It had a lot. It's a dark comic. I mean, it's Batman, but it's a dark comic, and it's kind of a role reverse because Batman is sort of the bad guy and the Joker is kind of the good guy. So that was something that I did not see coming, but at the same time it had some elements that I kind of connected to the recent movie about Joker, and I really enjoyed the comic. The art style was really amazing, and the story was definitely different than what I expected and different than what I've read so far from Batman, so I really enjoyed it. Next up, I wanted to read, or more like listen to, something interesting and something that would kind of take my mind off certain things that were happening in my life. So I listened to, I don't know what the name of it in English exactly was, something along the lines of Every Day the Way Back Home Gets Longer and Longer. I think that was the name of it. And it is, I don't even know if it's a novella or a short story. I think it's a novella. It's very short. I listened to it as an audiobook because I wanted to test out the Bulgarian audiobooks on my app and see how our actors and narrators do compared to the English ones. I really loved it. By the way, if you're in Bulgaria and you have this book as an audiobook in Bulgarian, I definitely recommend it. The narrator was really great and very impactful. It was an emotional read. It's very short and it tells the story of a man who is very old and his talks with his grandson. The man is starting to lose his memories. He's slowly descending into, I think, dementia, and it's very sad but also very heartwarming. He talks about his life, his wife, his son, his grandson, and little moments in his life, and they are described in a very particular way that makes you just picture it very vividly. I think it was a beautiful read, and if you want something to tug at your heartstrings, I definitely recommend it. Next up, I read a poet book. What? No, a poetry book, not a poet book. So a poetry book that is called In Love with Pain. I bought that for a colleague of mine. She left it at work so I can read it when I have night shifts or morning shifts. And I read it in one sitting. It has some very nice, I don't want to call them essays, but they are kind of essays, author's thoughts written on the pages that I really enjoyed. There were some that I liked, some that I didn't. There are some that I got, some that I didn't. And the poems in of themselves were really amazing, honestly. I think I enjoyed almost every single poem that I found. They're not exactly poetry like rhymes. I think they're called white rhymes. I don't even know what they're called. I'm not very versed in poetry. I think I've mentioned this before. I like the old fashion poetry that has rhymes, it has long texts and long sentences. I don't like poetry that's just 3 words on a page. That's not poetry for me. I call that specific kind of poetry modern poetry. So I'm not a fan of the modern stuff. I prefer the classics, but at the same time I do find here and there, now and then, I find modern poetry that I enjoy, and this one had quite a few bit of those. I really enjoyed quite a few of them. I will probably put some on the screen, just a few that kind of stuck with me because I actually really enjoyed some of them. Last but not least, I read IRobot by Isaac Asimov, and I really enjoyed that book. It is a classic sci-fi. It is, I was about to say it's about something, but it's not actually about one thing. I wanted to read it just because I haven't seen the movie with Will Smith, and I wanted to see the movie. And now that I've read the book, I kind of really don't know if I should see the movie or not. I guess I should, but I feel like the movie and the book have very little in common, just because the book is shaped in such a way and the story is told in such a way that I really can't imagine the movie following the book in any way. And if you've read the book, I guess you can maybe understand what I'm saying. Basically, it's a few different stories about robots and different robots throughout time, and the main narrator of the book, I guess, is a neuroscientist. I'm sorry. She was a robo-psychiatrist who tells the story of these different robots throughout time and I guess how their psyche held up, something like along those lines. It's kind of like a bunch of short stories all welded into one book, and they're all told from the same person. And I actually really enjoy this. I think I gave it 4 stars. The first half of the book was definitely, in my opinion, better than the last part. The last part was not my favorite, but the beginning and the way that she and the characters in general spoke about the robots and kind of dissected their psyche and the psychology was really interesting. The events that happened were also very interesting to me, and it's a good sci-fi book. It doesn't get into too much tech stuff, which I enjoyed, or maybe it did in the beginning, but I still enjoyed it. I didn't feel confused or anything because the characters were explaining everything like they were explaining it to people who have no idea what they're talking about, even though they were talking between themselves, and everyone who was having the conversation knew what they were talking about, but still it was explained and I enjoyed it. And as the naturally blonde idiot, I was very grateful that that happened. Anyway, I enjoyed this book and I would definitely recommend it. I think it's also a very short read, not very, but it's sort of a short read, so I think you guys might enjoy it. The last book that I'm going to be talking about is one that I am currently reading and I have not yet finished. I am actually listening to it as an audiobook, and that is King of Fools by Amanda Foody. It is the second book in the something something trilogy, I think. I listened to the first audiobook last year, maybe the year before that, which was Ace of Shades, and I absolutely fell in love with the story and the world. I am listening to the second part now. It is still really impactful, really great. I love the atmosphere and I love the characters, but I am exactly halfway through. I really don't think this is going to be a 5-star read for me. Ace of Shades was. This one is going to be maybe like a 3.5 to 4, just because it's interesting and it's lovely in terms of prose and in terms of character development and world descriptions, but in terms of plot, it's just not my personal thing, just because there's a lot of political intrigue in here and not a lot actually happens. There's mostly just the characters talking, scheming, and making plans, which is not my personal favorite. So that's the only reason I'm going to be giving it probably a lower rating, unless the ending kind of blows my mind. But yeah, I am still really, really enjoying it, and I think that whoever liked the first book will enjoy this one as well. Maybe not as much as the first book, but still great read. So that's it for all of the books that I wanted to talk to you guys about in the last couple of months that I read, that I tried to read, and so on. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and comment in the comment section down below if you've read any of the books that I talked about today, if you have any opinions about them. I would love to hear what you thought. So thank you guys so much for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe if you like what you would like to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!